The night was quiet, only the sound of wind moving through the lonely fields. The small wooden house stood at the edge of the settlement, its single light glowing faintly in the darkness. Inside, the human man, Daniel, had just finished his long day of work. He was tired sitting by the fire when suddenly, knock knock. The sound at the door made him freeze. It was midnight. No one ever came this late. Slowly, he stood up, his heart beating a little faster. Another knock followed, louder, this time. He reached the door, his hand hovering above the handle. He thought, who could it be at this hour? With caution, he pulled it open. There, in the cold night, stood a figure. Her skin was pale with a soft silver tone, her eyes large and glowing faintly in the darkness. Beside her clung two small children, trembling in the night air, their thin arms wrapped around her legs as if they feared being taken away. Daniel stared, not believing at first. It was an alien woman, a widow, by the look of her worn clothes and tired eyes. She spoke in a low, shaking voice. "Please, human, help us," she whispered. "My children, they need a father." Her words hit him like a strike. He looked at her, then at the children hiding behind her. The night wind blew sharply, and he noticed how thin their clothes were. The smallest child coughed weakly. Daniel's first thought was to close the door. He knew the rules. The alien settlement near his land didn't trust humans, and humans didn't trust them either. Taking in a widow like her could bring trouble, but her eyes, her desperate, pleading eyes, stopped him. They were not the eyes of a stranger. They were the eyes of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Why? Here?" he asked carefully. "Why me?" Tears shone in her eyes. She lowered her head, her voice breaking. "Because every door closed to me. Every door but yours. I had nowhere else to go. If you turn us away, we will not survive the night." The wind grew colder. The children pressed closer to her legs. One of them whispered in a trembling voice, "Mama, I'm hungry." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He could almost feel their fear as if it was his own. The woman stepped forward, just slightly, her body shaking. "If you want, I will warm your bed," she said softly. "Only take us in, my children. They need a father's protection. I will give myself if I must." Daniel froze at her words. His jaw clenched. Anger rose in him. Not at her, but at the cruel world that forced her to beg like this, forced her to offer her dignity for survival. "No," he said firmly, shaking his head. "You don't need to pay me that way." Her eyes widened in surprise as if she had expected rejection, or worse. He looked at the children again, their faces pale and thin from hunger. He sighed, stepping back from the doorway. "Come in," he said finally, his voice softer. "All of you, come inside before the cold takes you." The widow gasped slightly, her eyes filling with tears. She bent down, whispering to her children, "See, I told you. Maybe one human still has kindness." The children hesitated, then slowly walked forward. Daniel moved aside as the small family entered his home. The warmth of the fire touched their frozen skin, and he saw them relax just a little. The woman bowed her head deeply, her voice breaking again. "Thank you, human. You saved us tonight. My name is Lyra. These are my children, Nira and Kalen. We are in your debt." Daniel looked at them, the widow and her fragile children sitting by his fire. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. The aliens might hate him for this, and trouble could come to his door. But at that moment he only felt one thing. He could not let them suffer, not when they stood right before him. Outside, the night continued in silence, but inside the small wooden house, 3 lives had just been given a second chance, and Daniel, though he didn't know it yet, had just taken his first step into a story that would change his life forever. The fire burned softly inside the wooden house. Shadows danced along the walls as the alien widow, Lyra, sat near the flames with her 2 children pressed close to her side. Their small faces were pale, their eyes wide with both fear and exhaustion. Daniel stood a short distance away, watching them, still unsure of what he had done. He had opened his door, he had let them in, but the question echoed in his mind, why me? Lyra lifted her gaze toward him. Her hands trembled as she rubbed warmth into her children's arms. The silence grew heavy until finally Daniel spoke. You should explain. Why come here? Why risk so much to knock on my door? Her lips parted, but her voice cracked before the words came. She looked at her children, then back at him. Her eyes were tired, her tone filled with quiet despair. My husband was taken in the war, she whispered. He never returned. I waited. I prayed. But all that came back was silence. In our world, a widow is nothing, a woman without a mate is worthless, and children without a father are cursed. Daniel frowned, his hands tightening into fists at her words. Cursed? They are only children. But Lyra shook her head sadly. In my people's eyes, children of widows bring shame. They will not be fed. They will not be sheltered. They are left to starve unless the mother finds another protector. Every door I knocked on was shut. Every face turned cold. And when they looked at my little ones, all I saw was disgust. Her voice broke. A tear slipped down her cheek. One of her children, Nira, clung to her and whispered, Mama, don't cry, please don't cry. Daniel felt something stir in him. He had seen hardship before, but never like this. He stepped closer, his voice lower. So you came to me because you had no one else? Yes, Lyra said, her hands clutching her children tighter. I knew the humans were different. Some said you were dangerous. Some said you were cruel, but I thought, perhaps one human heart might still be softer than the hearts of my own people. And if I was wrong, then at least we would die quickly at your door instead of slowly in the cold. Her words cut deep into Daniel's chest. He stared at the flickering fire, trying to calm the storm inside him. He remembered the way she had offered herself at his door, the desperate words, I will warm your bed, and anger surged in him again. Anger not at her, but at the cruel rules of her world. You thought I would take advantage, he said quietly. You thought I would ask for you in exchange for safety. Lyra lowered her head in shame. It is the way of my people. A widow has nothing else to give. If not her body, then she and her children are cast away. I was ready to sacrifice myself, because their lives mean more than mine. Her words filled the room with silence. The crackling of the fire was the only sound. Daniel looked at the children again, so small, so fragile, and yet clinging to their mother with such trust. He finally sighed, pulling out a loaf of bread from his small cupboard. He set it down before them. Eat, he said, his voice firm. No one will starve in my home. The children's eyes widened. Their little hands reached forward, breaking pieces of bread with hunger sharper than words could describe. They ate quickly, tears rolling down their cheeks, whispering, thank yous with their mouths still full. Lyra, however, did not eat. She only stared at Daniel, her lips trembling. Why? She asked softly. Why would a human help a widow like me? What do you want from us? Daniel met her eyes, his voice steady. I don't want anything. I only know that no mother should have to beg in the cold and no child should be left hungry. That is enough. Her breath caught. Her eyes shimmered as if she could not believe what she had just heard. Slowly, her body relaxed, though her voice was still filled with uncertainty, but What will happen when the village finds out? She whispered. They will hate you for taking us in. They may punish you. They may drive you out. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had thought of that already. He knew she was right. The alien village had strict rules. He had seen how they looked at widows, like they were ghosts already forgotten. If they learned he had taken one into his home, they would not forgive him easily. But as he looked at the children finishing the bread, smiling faintly, for the first time, he made his choice. Then let them come. Daniel said firmly, I won't send you back into the cold. If trouble comes, I will face it. Lyra gasped softly, staring at him as if he were something impossible. Slowly, she lowered her head, her voice trembling. Perhaps I knocked on the right door after all. The firelight glowed warmer. The children curled against their mother, full for the first time in many days. And Daniel, though unsure of what dangers tomorrow would bring, knew one thing with certainty. He had already stepped too far to turn back, and somewhere deep inside a strange feeling stirred within him. A bond that was more than pity, more than kindness. Something that felt like the beginning of a story far greater than himself. The night stretched long, the fire burning low. Daniel sat awake in his chair, his arms crossed tightly as he stared into the flames. Behind him, on a blanket near the hearth, Lyra lay with her children curled beside her. Their soft breathing filled the silence, a fragile sound in the darkness. Sleep would not come to Daniel. His mind was restless, his heart heavy with questions. What had he done by opening his door? He had given them food, warmth, safety for the night. But what about tomorrow? He leaned forward, rubbing his face with both hands. The alien village was not far. Word always spread quickly there. If anyone learned that a human had taken in a widow and her cursed children, there would be consequences. Harsh ones. He heard a faint sound, soft footsteps. He looked up and found Lyra standing, her silver skin glowing faintly in the firelight. Her long hair fell loose over her shoulders. Her eyes lowered. You're not sleeping, she whispered. Daniel shook his head. No, my thoughts won't let me. For a moment she stood silently, then took a careful step closer. If you regret letting us in, I understand. You can send us away at dawn. It will be easier for you. Her words pierced him. His eyes narrowed. And what then? You'll freeze out there or starve with your children at your side? Lyra's lips trembled. She lowered her head. It would not be the first time widows have died like that. My people, they do not weep for us. The pain in her voice made his chest ache. He stood walking slowly toward her, his eyes locked with hers, firm but not unkind. I didn't open that door to throw you back out again, she swallowed, staring at him in shock. But why? Why risk yourself for us? You don't even know me. Daniel looked at her for a long time. He wanted to answer, but words felt weak against the storm inside him. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. Because it was the right thing to do. And because no one else did. Lyra's eyes glistened in the firelight. She stepped closer, her voice shaking. Then let me give you something. Let me make it fair. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Her hands clenched at her sides. Her voice just above a whisper. If you ask it, I will be yours, not as a wife, not as a partner, but as payment. My body is all I have left to offer. If it keeps my children safe, I will not resist. Daniel's stomach turned. His fists tightened. He almost shouted, but he forced his voice to remain steady. No, stop saying that. You are not a payment, and I don't want you that way. Her breath caught, her eyes wide with confusion. Then What do you want from me? Daniel stared at her, at the desperation in her face, and felt the weight of his own decision press down. He finally sighed. I want you to stay alive. I want your children to see another day. That is all. For a moment, Lyra could not answer. Her body trembled, her lips parted, but no words came. At last she lowered her head. Tears slipping silently down her cheeks, she whispered, No one has ever said such words to me before. The fire cracked softly between them. Daniel turned away, trying to calm his racing heart. But he knew the truth. By taking them in, he had chosen a dangerous path. He could still send them away at dawn and be free of it. He could close the door on their suffering and keep himself safe. But when he looked back at the blanket where the two small children slept, their thin arms wrapped around each other, their faces finally at peace, he knew he would not. He could not. The choice was made. Morning came slowly, light spilling through the cracks in the wooden walls. Lyra woke early, her children still asleep beside her. She looked around the small home, her eyes soft but heavy with worry. Daniel was outside chopping wood. His strong arm swung the axe down hard, each strike echoing through the cold air. Lyra stepped into the doorway, watching him. You should not do this, she said quietly. If they find us here, they will punish you. They will call you a thief who stole a widow and her children. Daniel leaned on the axe, breathing hard. Sweat glistened on his brow as he looked back at her. His voice was steady, unshaken. Then let them call me what they want. I won't throw you out. Her lips parted, her body trembling. She wanted to protest, but deep inside, a faint spark of hope began to grow. For the first time since her husband's death, she did not feel completely alone. Daniel turned back to his work, the axe rising and falling, his mind clear now. The risk was heavy, the path uncertain, but his decision was made. He would protect them no matter what, and somewhere in the shadows of the village, beyond the fields, eyes already watched the humans' home. Whispering voices carried through the settlement, rumors of what had happened in the night. Trouble was coming, but Daniel did not turn back. The morning sun rose slowly, its pale light falling over the small wooden house. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the smell of warm food drifted into the air. Inside, Daniel moved quietly in his kitchen, cooking a simple breakfast from what little he had, bread warming on the fire, and a pot of thin stew simmering gently. Behind him, the two children stirred on their blanket. Their small bodies shifted, eyes blinking open in the glow of the flames. The boy, Kalen, rubbed his face with one hand, while his sister, Nira, clung tightly to their mother's arm. Their first sight was not Daniel, but the roof above them. Strange, wooden, human-made. Nira whispered softly, Mama, where are we? Lyra stroked her daughter's hair, her own voice gentle. Safe, child. For now, we are safe. But when the children noticed Daniel moving near the fire, their little bodies stiffened. Nira quickly hid her face in her mother's clothes, while Kalen pulled her arm as if to warn her. Human. The boy hissed under his breath. He will hurt us, we should not stay. Daniel heard the words, his back turning slightly as he stirred the pot. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He understood. They had grown up fearing humans, perhaps taught that men like him were dangerous. When he turned with the bowl in his hands, the children pressed even closer to their mother. Their wide eyes followed every step he took. Daniel walked slowly, lowering himself to sit across from them. He set the food down on the floor between them, his movements calm, his voice steady. Eat, he said softly. It's for you. The smell of warm bread and stew filled the air. The children's eyes betrayed their hunger, but still they did not move. Nira's small fingers gripped Lyra's clothes tightly. Her stomach growling loudly in the silence, Daniel leaned back, pushing the food closer. Go on. It's safe. Lyra looked at her children, her heart aching. She whispered, He means no harm, try little ones. Kalen's eyes darted from the food to Daniel's face, suspicion deep in his young gaze. At last, he reached out slowly, his small hand trembling as he took a piece of bread. He pulled back quickly, as if Daniel might strike him. But when nothing happened, he broke the bread in half and gave the larger piece to his sister. Daniel watched quietly, not moving. The boy's protective gesture touched something deep inside him. He had seen soldiers show less courage than this child. The children ate quickly, their small mouths devouring the bread. The stew followed soon after, warm broth softening their fear just a little. Their eyes flicked to Daniel now and then, still cautious but not as sharp as before. When they finished, Kalen wiped his mouth on his sleeve. His voice was low, but it carried a question. Why did you feed us, human? What do you want? Daniel met the boy's eyes, his voice calm and firm. Nothing. I only want you to live. The boy frowned, confused by the answer. He glanced at his mother, but she was silent, her face soft, with tears she would not let fall. Hours passed and the day stretched on. Daniel worked outside, chopping wood and repairing the fence around his small home. Each time he glanced back at the house, he saw two pairs of small eyes watching him from the window. At first the children hid when he noticed, ducking quickly out of sight, but slowly their curiosity grew. By midday, Kalen had stepped outside, his little sister clinging to his hand. Daniel paused in his work, setting the axe aside. He crouched down, lowering himself so he wasn't towering over them. Do you want to help? He asked gently. The boy hesitated, pulling his sister behind him. His small shoulders tensed as if ready to run. But Daniel simply pointed at a small pile of chopped wood. You can carry that inside. It will make the fire warm for tonight. Kalen's lips pressed together. He studied the man's face, searching for a trick. At last he released his sister's hand and picked up a single log. He carried it carefully toward the door. Nira followed with a smaller piece. Lyra appeared at the doorway, her eyes wide with surprise as she watched her children helping instead of hiding. She looked at Daniel, and for the first time there was something almost like trust in her gaze. By evening, the bond had shifted. The children no longer flinched. Each time Daniel entered the room, Nira even laughed once when he clumsily bumped his head on the low rafters. Her soft giggle echoed in the little house, lightening the heavy air. Later that night, as the fire warmed them all, Kalen sat close. To his mother, his voice quiet. Mama, is he really not going to hurt us? Lyra stroked his hair, her eyes meeting Daniel's across the room. No, child, I think. This human is different. Kalen looked at Daniel, still cautious but with a new spark in his eyes. He whispered almost too softly to hear. Maybe he can be like a father. Daniel heard the words, though the boy did not mean for him to. His heart tightened, his breath caught in his chest. He did not answer, but in his silence he knew. Something inside him had already begun to change. The trust of a child was not easily given, but once earned it was stronger than stone. And in that moment Daniel realized he had gained something greater than he had ever expected. A place not as a savior, not as a stranger, but as part of a fragile, broken family, slowly learning to trust again. The village was never quiet for long. People always watched, always talked, and secrets never stayed hidden. By the second morning after Lyra and her children entered Daniel's home, whispers had already begun. A widow had vanished from the outer huts. Some said they saw her walking in the cold with her children. Others claimed she must have died, but then a boy who delivered grain swore he saw smoke rising from the human's chimney late at night. Smoke that had not been there the week before. By midday, rumors were running like wildfire through the narrow streets. "The widow is with him," one woman hissed, her voice sharp. "She dared go to a human's door. Disgusting," another spat. "No human should touch our people. She has brought shame to her kind." But others spoke differently, voices low, careful not to be heard too clearly. "At least the human gave her shelter," an old man muttered. "Would you have done the same, or would you let children freeze?" "Careful," someone warned. "If the council hears you defend him, they may cast you out too." Still the whispers spread. Some cruel, some doubtful, all carrying the same truth. Lyra and her children were no longer invisible, and Daniel's act of kindness had placed him in the center of a storm. Inside his small wooden house, Daniel worked quietly, repairing a broken stool near the fire. He could feel the weight in the air, heavier than the silence. He had noticed figures at the edge of his field that morning, watching, then vanishing. When he looked, he knew what it meant. Talk had begun, and soon more than talk would follow. Lyra sat near the fire, her children close beside her. She looked at him with troubled eyes. "They know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can feel it. They will not stay silent for long." Daniel set the stool aside, his jaw tightening. "Let them talk," he said, though inside his chest, unease pressed hard. Lyra tugged at her mother's sleeve, her small voice breaking the heavy air. "Mama, will they take us away?" Lyra's throat closed. She held her daughter close, her voice breaking softly. "No, child, not while I can still breathe." But Daniel saw the fear in Lyra's face, the way her hands shook even as she comforted her child. She knew the council's power. She knew the cruelty of her people toward widows, and he knew too. That night the air outside was restless. He stepped out onto the porch, staring across the field. The moon hung low, and in the distance faint figures stood at the edge of the village. Their voices carried just enough for him to hear. "Mark my words, the council will come. No human should keep a widow. It is against our law. He'll regret this," another voice answered. "The children are cursed. They bring misfortune, you'll see." Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. His eyes burned in the moonlight. He wanted to shout back, but he knew words would not change their minds. Instead, he turned and went back inside. When he entered, Lyra was awake. Her eyes met his, searching his face. "They are speaking already?" He nodded, sitting heavily on the chair, his voice low, steady. "Yes, they watch, they judge, but I will not send you away." Her lips parted, trembling. "Daniel, you don't understand. If they decide you are guilty, they will not only take me, they will punish you too." He looked at her, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "Then let them try." The words hung heavy in the room, and for a long moment silence followed. Then Kalen, the boy, shifted on his blanket, his eyes wide in the dim light. "Will you fight them?" the boy asked quietly. Daniel looked at him, surprised by the sudden question. He saw no fear in the boy's gaze now, only a spark of hope, maybe even belief. "If I must," Daniel said finally, "I will." Kalen lowered his head, whispering to his sister, "He is not like the others, Nira. He will protect us." The girl's small hand clutched tighter around her brother's, her sleepy eyes lifting toward Daniel, and for the first time, she did not look away in fear. The next day, the tension grew. The whispers in the market reached the ears of the council, and their sharp eyes turned toward the edge of the fields, toward the human's home. Inside, Lyra's children played softly with scraps of cloth near the fire. Their laughter, though faint, filled the room with warmth. Lyra watched them, her eyes soft, her heart aching. Then she looked at Daniel, her voice low. "They trust you now," she said. "Do you know how rare that is? They have never trusted anyone, not even our own people since their father died." Daniel looked at the children, then back at her, his voice steady, but quiet. "They should not have to live in fear. They deserve better." Lyra swallowed hard, her eyes shining. She whispered, "You have already given them more than I ever could." But outside the walls of the small wooden house, the storm was growing louder. The whispers of the village were no longer whispers. They were becoming demands, and soon the council would come knocking. The knock at Daniel's door came at dawn. It was not soft like Lyra's knock had been. It was sharp, hard, filled with authority. Bang, bang, bang. Daniel froze where he stood, his hands tightening around the wooden cup of water he held. Lyra was already awake, her children clinging to her dress, their faces pale, their eyes wide. She knew what this knock meant. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's the council." The knock came again, louder. "Open the door, human," a voice barked. "The council demands answers." Daniel set down the cup, his jaw tight. He walked to the door, pulling it open. Outside stood 3 figures draped in dark robes, their eyes cold. Behind them, several villagers gathered, whispering. Staring at the house with sharp suspicion, one of the robed figures stepped forward, his voice filled with disdain. "It is true then, you shelter a widow and her cursed offspring. Is this your doing?" Daniel's eyes narrowed. "I gave them food, I gave them warmth, they were freezing outside." The man spat at the ground. "A widow has no place among the living. She brings misfortune, and her children carry her shame. You know our laws. Human, you have broken them." Daniel's fists clenched at his sides, but his voice was steady. "Your laws would let children die. I won't follow that." A wave of whispers spread through the villagers. Some looked angry, others uncertain. The councilman's eyes blazed. "You dare question us? You, an outsider?" Daniel stepped forward, his voice firm. "I dare because I know what is right." At that moment, Lyra appeared in the doorway, her children clinging tightly to her. Her face was pale, but her voice was strong. "Please, council, punish me if you must, but leave him. He only showed us kindness." But the councilman sneered. "You shame us further by standing at his side. You offer yourself to a human. Do you think we will forgive such disgrace? Both you and the human will answer for this." The crowd stirred. Some shouted, "Take them away," while others whispered, "But the children, they are innocent." Another council member raised her hand, silencing the crowd. Her voice was cold and sharp. "There is only one way to settle this. The human must face the trial. If he passes, the widow may remain under his protection. If he fails, all of them will be cast out together." Daniel frowned. "What trial?" Her lips curved into a thin smile. "Trial by fire. It is our law, a test of courage and strength. You must walk through the flame, bear the weight of our challenge. If you survive, the widow and her children will belong to you. If you fall, you will all perish together." Gasps rose from the villagers. Lyra's face went pale. She whispered fiercely, "No, this is madness. You can't." But Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, stopping her words. His eyes were calm, but his voice was strong. "If this is what it takes, I will do it." Lyra's breath caught. She looked at him with shock. "Daniel, you don't understand. No one survives the trial. They use it to kill without saying the word." Daniel turned his gaze toward her children, who clung to her with wide, terrified eyes. His chest tightened, but he did not look away. "Then I'll survive," he said quietly. The council gave him until nightfall. The villagers spread the word quickly, and by evening, a great fire pit had been prepared in the center of the village. Flames roared high, casting shadows across the watching crowd. Daniel stood at the edge, his shirt stripped away, the heat of the flames hitting his skin. The council stood behind him, their eyes filled with cruel satisfaction. Lyra clutched her children tightly at the crowd's edge, her tears glistening in the firelight. The councilman raised his hand, his voice booming. "Step into the fire, human. Prove your worth, or burn with your shame." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. The heat licked at his skin, sweat beading on his forehead. He glanced once at Lyra, at the fear in her eyes, at the small hands of her children clutching her dress, and in that moment he knew. This was no longer about himself, it was about them. He stepped forward into the fire. The crowd gasped, flames roared around him, heat biting into his skin, his muscles trembled, but he gritted his teeth. Each step was agony, the air thick and choking, but he forced himself onward. Voices shouted, some in awe, some in fury. "He will not last. He dares the fire." Lyra's scream pierced the night. "Daniel!" But he kept walking, his vision blurred, his breath burning, yet he refused to fall. He thought of the children's eyes, of their trust, of the way Nira had laughed when he bumped his head, of Kalen's whisper, "Maybe he can be like a father, he would not fail them." With one final step, he emerged from the other side of the fire pit, his skin blistered, his body trembling, but alive. The crowd fell silent, shock written on every face. No one had ever crossed before. No one. Daniel stood tall, his chest heaving, his voice hoarse but unbroken. "I am still here. They are mine now, and I will not let you take them." The silence shattered into cries. Some shouted with anger, but many more gasped in awe. Whispers spread quickly. The human had survived the fire. The council's faces were pale. Their law had been followed, and by their own words, the widow and her children now belonged to him. Lyra fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Her children clung to her, whispering, "He lived. Mama, he lived." And Daniel, though pain burned across his body, felt something deeper than the flames. He had faced the fire, and for the first time he truly understood. This was not just a choice anymore. This was a family. The night after, the trial was heavy with silence. Smoke from the fire pit still lingered in the air, and the villagers had returned to their homes, whispering about what they had seen. For the first time in living memory, a man had walked through the flames and survived. Not just a man, a human. Daniel's body burned with pain, blisters covering his arms and chest, but he stood tall, refusing to collapse before the council. His steps were unsteady as he walked back to the edge of the crowd, where Lyra and her children waited. When Nira saw him, she broke free from her mother's arms, running toward him with a cry. "He's alive! Mama, he's alive!" Daniel knelt down as best he could, his knees trembling. He opened his arms, and the little girl threw herself against him, clinging tightly. Kalen followed quickly, his small arms wrapping around Daniel's waist. For the first time, the children did not look at him with fear, but with shining eyes full of pride. Lyra approached slowly, her hands shaking. Tears streamed freely down her silver cheeks as she looked at him. You crossed the fire," she whispered, her voice breaking. "No one has ever done it, Daniel. You should be dead." Daniel gave a faint smile, though pain etched every line of his face. "I told you. I wouldn't let them take you. Not you, not the children." She dropped to her knees before him, her forehead touching the ground. "We are yours now. Not because of their law, but because you earned us with your heart." The villagers around them watched in silence. Some turned away in anger, but others lowered their heads in shame. And a few, just a few, whispered words that had never been spoken about a human before. Perhaps he is not a curse. Perhaps he is chosen. The council could not undo their own decree. Their law was clear. A survivor of the trial by fire had earned the right to protect what he fought for. And so, though rage twisted their faces, they stepped back, powerless, to challenge him further. That night, Daniel brought Lyra and the children back to his home. His wounds were tended with what herbs she had. Her hands moved gently, her touch soft, and for the first time, it was not the touch of desperation but of care. The children refused to leave his side. They brought him water, laid blankets over him, and whispered to each other in the dark. He's strong. He's ours now. When morning came, the world outside felt different. The villagers still watched, still whispered, but no one dared to approach. The fire had marked him, and in their eyes, he was something more than a man now. Daniel stepped outside, his body still aching but his spirit unbroken. Lyra followed, her children clutching her hands. Together they looked at the sunrise. The sky painted in gold and red. Lyra spoke softly, her voice full of wonder. Do you realize what you've done? You changed everything, not just for us, but for them too. They will never forget this. Daniel glanced at her, his eyes steady. I didn't do it for them. I did it for you, for the children. Her lips trembled, her eyes shimmered. She placed a hand over her, heart whispering, Then let us be yours, not by force, not by fear, but by choice. The children looked up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. Can we call you father now? Lyra asked softly. The question struck deep. Daniel's throat tightened. He had never thought of himself as a father, never imagined such a role. But when he looked at their faces, innocent, trusting, full of love he had not expected, he felt something shift inside him. Yes, he said at last, his voice rough but firm. If you want me, then I will be your father. The children cried out with joy, wrapping their arms around him. Lyra stood close, tears streaming as she whispered, You gave us life again, Daniel, and now we will give you a family. Days turned to weeks, and slowly, life in the village changed. Some still spat at the ground when they saw them. Some still muttered curses, but others began to soften. The sight of the human carrying wood, with the widow at his side or playing with the children near the fields, began to stir questions in their hearts. Perhaps kindness was not weakness. Perhaps love was stronger than their cruel traditions. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Daniel sat outside with Lyra and the children. The air was warm, and the sound of laughter filled the little yard. Lyra played with flowers, Kaelin carved shapes into a stick, and Lyra sat beside Daniel, her eyes full of quiet peace. You faced the fire for us, she said softly. But it was not the fire that proved you, Daniel, it was your heart. And now, no matter what they say, you are ours. Daniel looked at her, his lips curving into a small smile. Then let it be so. The night settled around them, calm and gentle. Unlike the cold, fearful nights before, this one carried warmth, a promise of tomorrow. And in that moment, Daniel realized the truth. He had opened his door to a desperate knock in the midnight cold. But what had stepped inside was more than just a widow and her children. It was a family he never knew he needed. And with them, a new dawn had begun,